All right, so ready to dive in. Today we're tackling a topic that's deceptively simple, but gets really interesting once you really start to pick at it. We're talking about naive realism.
Ah, yes.
And I think, at first glance, it seems kind of obvious, right? Like, what you see is what you get.
Right.
You
Yeah.
look around the room, you see a chair, you figure, well, there's a chair there.
Yeah.
That's that.
Yeah. It's definitely the intuitive way to think about things. Most of us just go through our lives assuming our senses are giving us a fairly accurate picture of what's really out there.
Right, just like a one-to-one kind of thing.
Exactly. In fact, the philosopher C.D. Broad, he even called seeing saltatory, meaning it feels like our vision just leaps across space and just directly reveals the true nature of things. Like, bam, there it is.
So if that's the case, then what's the problem? Why are we even, questioning naive realism in the first place?
Well, it gets tricky when you start thinking about all the times that our senses get things wrong.
Right.
Like, think about hallucinations or illusions, where you either see something that's not actually there, or your brain just completely misinterprets what your eyes are actually taking in.
Yeah, that definitely throws a wrench in things because if we can have these really vivid experiences that don't actually line up with reality, how can we ever be sure we're really directly perceiving
Yeah.
anything?
That's the million-dollar question that keeps philosophers up at night.
Yeah.
There's this one really wild example that William Fish, the philosopher whose work we're looking at today, he brings up this case of a patient who had what's called a visual field defect.
Hmm.
So imagine, like, part of their vision is impaired, right? They can't actually see anything in that area,
Yeah.
and yet they experience these vivid hallucinations specifically in that blind spot.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so even when there's literally no information, no like light or anything coming in through their eyes, their brain is still like creating this whole visual experience.
It's really highlighting how much of a role our brains play in constructing what we perceive.
Right.
Because if our perception was purely shaped by the world, like naive realism might suggest, then how could we ever perceive something that isn't even within our field of vision?
Okay, so maybe naive realism it's a little too simple. Like
Yeah.
it doesn't quite capture the whole picture, but does that mean, we're just doomed to walk around like doubting our senses all the time? Like is there no such thing as real seeing?
Well, that's where things get even more interesting because some philosophers, they argue for this view called disjunctivism. And I know, it sounds like a mouthful,
Yeah.
but bear with me. It's actually a pretty cool idea.
Okay.
Basically, disjunctivists believe that there's this fundamental difference between genuinely perceiving something and then having an experience that just seems like seeing.
Okay, so it's not just that we're seeing something that isn't there. It's that the whole experience of hallucinating is just fundamentally different from actually perceiving something, even if it feels really real in the moment.
Exactly. Exactly. They would argue that a hallucination isn't simply a case of seeing something that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
It's a totally different type of mental event. And the key is we need a way to explain this difference without just relying solely on the external world.
So if it's not just the world dictating what we see, then what else is going on? Like what's happening inside our heads?
Well, one really crucial factor is attention. Think about it. You're not consciously aware of absolutely everything in your visual field at this very moment, are you?
No, definitely not. I'm
Yeah.
like I'm so focused on our conversation right now. I mean, I don't even know. Like a giraffe could walk by my window and I probably wouldn't even notice.
And that's a perfect illustration. Because there's this fascinating thing called sighted blindness, where people completely miss something that's right in front of them just because their attention is focused somewhere else.
Oh, right. Like that experiment where people are so busy counting basketball passes that they totally miss the gorilla walking across the court.
Yes.
It's like our brains just edit stuff out and we don't even realize it.
Exactly. It's a prime example of how our brains, they prioritize information, especially when our attentional resources are kind of limited. So
Hmm.
so what we perceive isn't just this raw feed from our eyes. It's a combination of that sensory data and then our brain's interpretation of it, which is being heavily influenced by where our attention is being directed.
Okay, so this is kind of blowing my mind. So going back to the hallucinations for a second, if they're not just about seeing something that isn't there, what else is going on? Like what's actually happening in the brain when someone's having a hallucination? So are we saying that even though like a hallucination can feel incredibly real to the person experiencing it, there's something fundamentally different happening in their brain compared to when we're actually like accurately perceiving something that's really there?
Yeah, that's exactly it. Fish, he argues that hallucinations, they might lack this certain richness and detail that we find in real seeing.
Okay.
It's kind of like when you wake up from a dream, you realize that even though it felt so vivid while you were in it, something about the details just felt a little off.
Oh yeah, totally. Like I have these recurring dreams where I'm back in my childhood home, but the layout's never quite right. Like
Yeah.
there's an extra room or the stairs lead somewhere totally weird, but in the dream it feels so real.
Exactly. And that's a great example of how even a really convincing experience can still lack that certain something that kind of anchors it to reality.
Right.
And what Fish suggests is that hallucinations might actually be more about the beliefs that they trigger rather than the raw experience itself.
Okay.
He even mentions this example of someone who's hallucinating, but at the same time they're aware that what they're seeing isn't actually real.
Whoa, really?
Yeah.
So how does that even work? Like if they're seeing it, how can they also know it's not real?
Well, and that's exactly the thing is like how do you square that with just straight up naive realism?
Right, right.
It doesn't quite fit, does it?
So are we saying then that hallucinations are more like super intense imaginings that our brain then kind of mislabels as being real even though they're not?
That's a really fascinating way to think about it.
Yeah.
And it really highlights how much more is going on with perception than we often, give it credit for.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not this passive process of just, absorbing information. It's an active construction. And sometimes our brains they make mistakes in that construction process.
This is getting deep. So how do we even begin to define what a hallucination is if it's not just about seeing things that aren't there?
Well, Fish, he offers this really intriguing definition. He says a hallucination is a mental event that has the same kind of cognitive effects as a veridical perception, meaning it triggers the same sorts of thoughts, the same sorts of beliefs, but, and this is key, it lacks that crucial element of actually being connected to a real object or event in the world.
Okay, so let me see if I understand this. If I were to say hallucinate a friendly talking squirrel,
Okay.
my brain would react in a lot of the same ways as if I were actually seeing a real talking squirrel, even though obviously there's no, bushy-tailed chatterbox in sight.
Exactly. You got it.
Yeah.
The hallucination, it would be missing that grounding in reality, that connection to an actual, talking squirrel out there in the world.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So we've spent a lot of time unpacking hallucinations, but what about illusions?
That
How do they fit into all of this? Because they're not quite the same as seeing things that aren't there, but something's definitely, something's off.
Yeah, you're right. Illusions they're kind of their own beast.
Right.
And remember earlier how we touched on the fact that there are these different categories of illusions.
Hmm.
Physical illusions, cognitive illusions, and optical illusions.
Right, right.
And each one of those, it kind of plays with our perception in a slightly different way.
Right. The lines get a little blurry for me. So remind me again, how do those different types of illusions actually break down?
Okay, so with physical illusions, you might actually be perceiving something that's real about the world. It's just that the way your senses are interpreting that information, it's leading to this unexpected or distorted experience.
Okay, I think I get that. Can you give me an example?
Yeah, so think about how a car, like, it can look like a totally different color under streetlights compared to how it looks in broad daylight.
Oh, yeah.
That's a physical illusion at play.
Yeah. No, I've definitely experienced that where you're like, wait, is that my car?
Right, exactly.
Like,
That's not the color I thought it was.
exactly. So it's not that the car's like magically changing color. It's just that the lighting, the context of the lighting is making us see it differently.
Yeah. But you're still seeing a real property of the car. It's being filtered through those particular lighting conditions.
That's wild. It's like our brains are trying to make sense of the information, but then they kind of get tripped up along the way.
Yeah.
So, okay, what about cognitive illusions then?
So cognitive illusions, they tend to rely more on our own interpretations and expectations that we bring to the table.
Okay.
So think about that classic example of mistaking a rope
Yeah.
for a snake, in dim lighting.
Right.
It's not that the rope is inherently deceptive. It's that our brains are filling in the blanks with kind of the most likely scenario based on limited information.
Oh, so it's like our brains are jumping to conclusions like, oh, shadowy, snake-like shape, dimly lit place, must be a snake. Time to panic.
Exactly. Our brains, they're constantly trying to make sense of the world, and sometimes they rely on these shortcuts, these assumptions that lead to those kinds of misinterpretations.
Right.
And then you've got optical illusions, which are those are the classic kind of mind benders where what we see just doesn't seem to add up with reality at all. Like those images that appear to be moving, even though they're actually static.
Oh man, optical illusions are like my favorite. They're so trippy. They make my brain feel like it's like short-circuiting, but in a good way.
Yeah.
But it also makes you wonder if our brains can be tricked so easily, can we ever really trust what we're seeing?
Right. That's the big question, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
it's not like we're walking around, constantly questioning our every perception, but maybe we should be a little more critical of what we think we see.
Right. Like that whole saying, seeing is believing, might need an asterisk next to it.
For sure, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's really where understanding these different ways that our perception can be, shaped and even tricked is so valuable.
Yeah.
It's not that our senses are inherently unreliable, but we just need to be aware of that potential for error, those little glitches in the matrix.
Right. Those glitches in the matrix. And that awareness can actually help us navigate the world, maybe with a bit more caution and definitely a healthy dose of curiosity.
Exactly. After all, who doesn't love a good brain teaser, especially when it makes us question the very nature of reality itself?
Okay, so we've talked about how our brains can sometimes, lead us astray with these illusions and stuff. But how does that all tie back to this bigger picture of consciousness and perception that we've been kind of unpacking?
Well, it gets even more interesting when you start to consider this concept of like neural replication.
Okay.
So imagine a future, right, where we could create like a perfect copy of your brain,
Okay.
down to like the last neuron, the last synapse. The question is, would that replica, would it experience those same illusions in the same way that you do?
That's a really good question because I mean, if our brains are kind of wired in a way that makes us susceptible to these illusions, then wouldn't a perfect replica like have those same vulnerabilities?
Yep. It might seem that way, right?
Yeah.
But but here's where things get really, really nuanced. Because some philosophers would actually argue that even with a perfect neural replica, the experience of those illusions, it might not be identical.
Real.
And the reason they give for that is our brains aren't these isolated machines. They're shaped by, a lifetime of interactions with the world, with the environment. And so we develop these perceptual quirks, through experience.
So you're saying that even if this replica had all the same like neural pathways as me, it wouldn't have the same like history of sensory experiences to kind of draw on?
Exactly.
Okay.
Like a disembodied brain in a vat,
Yeah.
even a perfect copy, it wouldn't have that same history of, interacting with the world, of reaching out and touching a doorknob, of walking across a room and misjudging the distance because of an optical illusion.
So even the way we experience illusions is it's all like intertwined with our physical embodiment and our own like unique journey of being in the world.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, it really highlights how much of who we are, how we perceive and experience reality, it's shaped not just by, the stuff inside our skulls, but also by all those interactions we have with the world outside.
Oh, this has been such a trip. I feel like I've gone from like naive realism to realizing just how much I don't know about how my own brain works. So, I guess as we kind of wrap things up here, what are some key takeaways for our listener? Like what can they take away from all of this? Besides a newfound appreciation for like the complexities of perception.
Well, I think the most important takeaway is that perception, it's not this passive thing that just happens to us, right?
Right.
It's an active process. We're not just these sponges, soaking up information from the world. We're
Yeah.
we're actively constructing our own experience.
So it's not just about what's out there. It's about how our brains interpret it and how they try to make sense of it. We're all kind of looking through our own lens.
Exactly. And that interpretation, that meaning-making process, it's influenced by everything from our attention and our expectations to our past experiences to even, the physical structure of our bodies. It's like this incredible dance between the world and our minds.
And like any good dance, there's always room for a little improvisation, a
Exactly.
few missteps, maybe even the occasional mind-bending illusion.
Exactly.
Nah.
And I think understanding those missteps, those quirks of perception, it can actually help us be more mindful of how our brains work, how easily they can be tricked, and ultimately, how much beauty there is in the mystery of it all.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Yeah.
So, to our listeners, next time you see something strange or unexpected, or just, something that makes you go, huh, hmm, don't
Mm.
just take it at face value. Right. Take a second to, consider the hidden machinery of your own perception. Think about that intricate interplay of your senses and your interpretations and just, appreciate the wonder of it all.
Beautifully said. It's a reminder that even the most ordinary act of seeing, it's a testament to the incredible power and the adaptability of the human mind.
Well said. And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder that fascinating dance between your mind and the world. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep those perceptions sharp.